Sign this before the wedding." My father-in-law Harold slid the 30-page document across his mahogany dining table, his expression carrying the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he held all the cards. "My son's inheritance must be protected from outside interests. You understand, of course, nothing personal, but the Whitmore family has worked too hard to let assets disappear into failed marriages." My fiancé Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly embarrassed but not protesting, while Harold's wife Margaret nodded approvingly at her husband's financial prudence. But why did I read the prenuptial agreement silently without protest, and why did my attorney lean over with a folder that would transform Harold's condescension into stunned silence? "Ms. Okonkwo, shall I share your financial disclosure with the Whitmore family?" I nodded. My lawyer, Patricia Martinez, handed Harold a leather folder containing documents he clearly hadn't anticipated. "My client's current verified net worth is $47 million in liquid assets, with an additional $12 million in real estate holdings and intellectual property valued at approximately $8 million. Total, $67 million. She paused. "Your son's projected inheritance from the Whitmore Family Trust is approximately $4 million, based on the estate documents you filed with this prenuptial request." The silence was absolute. "Perhaps," Patricia continued, "we should discuss who actually needs protection in this marriage." I'd met Daniel Whitmore at a charity gala 3 years ago. He was a pediatric surgeon, genuinely skilled, genuinely compassionate, genuinely unaware of his family's obsession with their modest wealth. We'd talked for hours about his work with children in underserved communities, about my own background in technology, about everything except money or family names. He didn't know who I was. Neither did anyone else at that event. I preferred it that way. Amara Okonkwo was a common enough name that it didn't trigger recognition. My company, Nexus Innovations, operated in the business-to-business space, enterprise software that powered logistics for Fortune 500 companies. We weren't consumer-facing. We weren't flashy. We were just extraordinarily profitable. I founded Nexus at 26 with $50,000 borrowed from my grandmother and a problem I identified during my years at a consulting firm. 8 years later, we had 200 employees, contracts with major corporations across 6 industries, and revenue that made my accountants very happy. But I didn't broadcast any of this. I drove a modest car. Lived in a comfortable but unremarkable house. Dressed well but not ostentatiously. The people who knew about my wealth were limited to my financial team, my closest friends, and my grandmother, who still insisted on giving me $20 for my birthday every year. Daniel had fallen in love with me thinking I was a technology consultant, technically accurate, massively understated. And I'd fallen in love with him because he was kind, brilliant, and completely unimpressed by the wealth his family constantly referenced. "My parents are obsessed with the Whitmore legacy," he'd warned me early in our relationship. "Old money mentality, even though we're barely 2 generations in. My grandfather built a successful insurance company, and now my father acts like we're the Rockefellers." "How much are we talking about?" "Maybe 15 million total? Split between my father, aunt, and eventually divided among the cousins. It's comfortable, but it's not dynasty money." "Does it matter to you?" "Not at all. I became a pediatric surgeon because I wanted to help kids, not because I needed the money." He'd smiled. "I'd rather be useful than wealthy." That's when I knew I'd marry him. Not despite his family's wealth obsession, but because he'd rejected it entirely. The engagement had triggered Harold's protective instincts. From the moment Daniel announced our intention to marry, Harold had been assessing me like a potential business liability. He'd asked about my family, Nigerian immigrants, working class, no connections he recognized. He'd inquired about my career, vague answers about technology consulting. He'd investigated my background, finding nothing alarming, but nothing impressive either. In his mind, I was a gold digger. A woman of modest means who'd attached herself to his surgeon's son, angling for access to Whitmore money. The prenuptial agreement was his weapon, a document designed to humiliate me, establish my lesser status, and protect his family from my obvious mercenary intentions. He hadn't bothered to actually investigate my finances. He'd assumed he knew the answer based on my appearance, my family background, my refusal to display wealth in ways he recognized. His assumptions were catastrophically wrong. The prenuptial meeting had been Harold's idea. A family discussion about protecting everyone's interests, he'd called it. He'd arranged it at his home, his territory, his advantage, and invited his personal attorney to ensure the agreement was properly executed. I'd brought Patricia. "You're sure about this?" she'd asked before we arrived. "We could simply reveal your assets and end the conversation immediately. I want to see what they're asking for first. I want to understand who they think I am." The prenup Harold presented was breathtaking in its condescension. All Whitmore family assets would remain separate property in the event of divorce. Any appreciation on those assets during the marriage would also remain with Daniel. I would be entitled to reasonable spousal support for a maximum of 3 years, after which I would have developed sufficient independence to support myself. The document assumed I had nothing. That everything in the marriage would come from Daniel's family. That I was, fundamentally, a recipient of Whitmore generosity rather than a partner bringing equal or greater value. I read all 30 pages without comment. Then Patricia handed over my folder. Harold's face cycled through several expressions. Confusion first, the documents didn't match his assumptions. Then disbelief, the numbers must be wrong. Then recalculation, trying to understand how he'd so badly misjudged the situation. And finally, something close to fear, the realization that he just deeply insulted someone who didn't need his family's money, his approval, or his respect. This can't be accurate, he managed. It's verified by 3 independent accounting firms, Patricia replied. Ms. Okonkwo's company, Nexus Innovations, has been valued at $89 million in its most recent assessment. She holds 68% ownership, making her stake worth approximately $60 million before taxes. Her liquid assets, real estate, and intellectual property holdings bring the total to approximately $67 million. But she never said. She never said because you never asked. You assumed her background meant she couldn't possibly have achieved independent success. You were wrong. Margaret finally spoke. Why would you hide this? If you have money, I didn't hide anything. I simply didn't volunteer financial information to people who were clearly prepared to judge me regardless of the facts. I looked at Harold directly. You've spent 6 months treating me like a threat to your family's assets. Making comments about people who marry for money. Warning Daniel to be careful. All based on assumptions you never bothered to verify. We were being prudent. You were being prejudiced. There's a difference. Daniel had been silent throughout the exchange. Now he stood, his expression a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. Amara, why didn't you tell me about any of this? I told you I worked in technology. I told you I'd started a company. I told you I was comfortable financially. $67 million isn't comfortable. It's exactly why I didn't give you numbers. I wanted you to fall in love with me, not my portfolio. I reached for his hand. The money doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change us. It just changes your father's calculations. Daniel turned to his father. You are going to make her sign this. This insulting document that treats her like a gold digger. And she's worth more than our entire family combined. We didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You decided who she was the moment you heard her name and saw her background. Nigerian immigrant family. No Ivy League connections. Must be after our money. His voice carried a bitterness I'd never heard before. I'm ashamed of you both. Daniel, we were trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From a woman who built a $90 million company from nothing? From someone who's more financially successful than anyone in this family has ever been. He shook his head. The only thing I need protection from is your small-mindedness. The meeting ended badly. Harold attempted to pivot, suggesting that of course, they'd revise the prenup to be more equitable given the new information. Patricia shut that down immediately. My client isn't interested in revising the document. If Mr. Daniel Whitmore wishes to proceed with the marriage without a prenuptial agreement, that's his choice. If the Whitmore family insists on a prenup, my client is prepared to propose terms that actually protect her significantly larger assets. That won't be necessary, Daniel said. We're not having a prenup. End of discussion. Daniel, be reasonable. I'm being perfectly reasonable. Amara and I are getting married because we love each other. If the marriage fails, which I don't believe it will, we'll handle the financial implications like adults. I don't need a contract to prove my commitment, and neither does she. We left shortly after. The drive home was quiet. I'm sorry, Daniel finally said. For my family. For the assumptions. For all of it. You didn't make those assumptions. No, but I didn't challenge them either. For 6 months, I watched my parents treat you like a suspect, and I kept hoping they'd come around naturally. I should have said something sooner. You're saying something now. That matters. Does it? They'll never see you the same way. Now you're not a gold digger, you're a threat. Someone who makes them feel small. I don't need them to see me any particular way. I need you to see me clearly. Do you? He pulled the car over, turned to face me fully. I see a woman who built something incredible without needing anyone's help. Who let my family underestimate her for months without losing her temper. Who never once used her success to make me feel lesser, even though you could have. He took my hand. I see the person I want to spend my life with. The money is irrelevant. Your father doesn't think it's irrelevant. My father thinks a lot of things that are wrong. That's his problem, not ours. The wedding happened 3 months later. We'd planned something modest, neither of us wanted ostentation, regardless of what we could afford. A ceremony at a botanical garden, dinner for 80 guests, dancing until midnight. Simple, meaningful, perfect. Harold and Margaret attended. They'd made tentative peace with the situation, though I could see the recalculation behind Harold's eyes whenever he looked at me. I was no longer the gold digger, I was the mystery, the unknown quantity who had somehow achieved more than he had while staying invisible. He couldn't decide if he respected me or feared me. Probably both. Your parents seem uncomfortable, my grandmother observed during the reception. They're adjusting to new information. About your money? About their assumptions. They spent months convinced I was after their family's wealth. Finding out I could buy and sell their entire estate complicated their worldview. Grandma laughed. Some people can only understand worth in dollars. When their dollars aren't the biggest ones in the room, they don't know how to feel. You never cared about the money. I cared that you built something meaningful. The numbers are just measurement. What matters is that you created something from nothing, something that exists because you willed it into existence. That's what I'm proud of. The real conversation with Harold happened 6 months into the marriage. He'd requested a meeting, just the two of us, at a restaurant he selected. Neutral territory, he probably thought, though I suspected he wanted witnesses in case things went badly. I owe you an apology, he began. For the prenup. For the assumptions. For treating you like a threat rather than a person. I appreciate that. But I also need to understand something. Why didn't you just tell us? When you saw how we were treating you, why not produce financial statements and end the conversation? Because your treatment of me revealed who you are. If I'd announced my wealth immediately, you would have welcomed me for the wrong reasons. Instead, I learned what your family values, how you treat people you perceive as lesser, what your assumptions say about your character. That's calculating. It's observational. There's a difference. I sipped my wine. I built a company by understanding people, what they want, what they assume, what they reveal when they think no one important is watching. Your family showed me exactly who they were during those months of prenuptial negotiations. And who are we? People who measure worth in financial statements. Who see marriage as a business arrangement. Who couldn't imagine that a Nigerian immigrant's daughter might have built something you never could. Harold was quiet for a long moment. You're not wrong. I was, exactly that prejudiced. I looked at your name, your family background, and I made assumptions that were convenient rather than accurate. Why? Because it was easier than admitting my son might choose someone based on qualities I don't know how to measure. Margaret and I married for practical reasons, compatible families, aligned finances, similar social circles. Love was something that grew later, if it grew at all. Daniel chose you for reasons I still don't fully understand, and that scared me. So you tried to control what you couldn't understand. Yes. And I failed. And in failing, I revealed exactly the limitations you just described. The relationship with my in-laws evolved slowly. It was never warm, too much damage had been done, too many assumptions had been exposed. But it became functional. Harold stopped making comments about protecting assets. Margaret stopped introducing me as Daniel's wife and started using my name. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The real change came when their grandchild arrived. Our daughter, Lila, was born 2 years after the wedding. She had Daniel's eyes and my determination, according to my grandmother, who spoiled her relentlessly from birth. Holding his grandchild for the first time, something shifted in Harold's expression. He wasn't calculating her future inheritance or assessing her potential value to the family portfolio. He was just a grandfather, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of new life. She's beautiful, he said. She is. I hope, he stopped, started again. I hope she grows up to be like you. Someone who builds things. Someone who doesn't need anyone else's approval or money or validation. That's what I hope for her too. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what Daniel saw. You're not what I expected, and I mean that as the highest compliment I can give. What did you expect? Someone who wanted what we had. What I've learned is that you never wanted any of it. You wanted Daniel. And Daniel is exactly what you deserve. Nexus Innovations continued to grow. We expanded internationally, opened offices in 3 countries, and eventually took the company public. The IPO valued us at $340 million, making my stake worth significantly more than the $67 million Harold had learned about at that painful prenuptial meeting. I didn't tell him about the new number. He could read the business news like everyone else. Daniel continued his pediatric surgery practice, donating increasingly large portions of his salary to the foundation we'd established for children without access to medical care. The Whitmore family wealth became irrelevant to both of us. We had more than enough, and what we had was entirely ours. Do you ever think about the prenup? Daniel asked one anniversary. Sometimes. Not with anger, just curiosity. Your father was so certain he was protecting the family from a gold digger. He couldn't imagine any other possibility. He was protecting himself from his own insecurities. Our family money was the only thing that made him feel significant. When he discovered you didn't need it, didn't even notice it, his whole framework collapsed. Is he happy now? With how things turned out? I think he's relieved. He expected our marriage to fail, expected you to eventually reveal your true mercenary nature. When that didn't happen, when we just kept building a life together, he had to accept that his assumptions were completely wrong. That must be uncomfortable for him. It is. But it's also growth, in his way. He's learning that his money doesn't buy judgment. That wealth doesn't equal wisdom. That the people he dismissed might be more capable than he ever imagined. Lila asked me about it years later. She was 14, curious about family history, trying to understand the complicated dynamics she'd observed at Whitmore gatherings. Grandpa Harold showed me this old document, she said. Something about a prenup? He seemed embarrassed about it. He should be. It was an agreement he wanted me to sign before I married your father, an agreement designed to protect his family's money from me. Why would they need protection from you? They didn't. They assumed I was marrying your father for money because they couldn't imagine any other reason someone with my background would want to join their family. But you have more money than them. I do now. I did then too. They just never bothered to find out. That's kind of stupid. It's kind of human. People make assumptions based on limited information, and those assumptions reveal their values more than they reveal truth. Your grandfather assumed that anyone without visible wealth must be pursuing wealth. That says nothing about me and everything about him. Did you ever forgive him? I forgave the ignorance. I'm still working on forgiving the arrogance. I smiled. But I married your father knowing exactly what his family was like. I chose him anyway, because he wasn't like them. And that choice has been the best one I ever made. He slid the prenup across the table expecting compliance, expecting me to sign away rights to money I supposedly didn't have, protection from assets I supposedly was pursuing. He saw my name, my background, my modest presentation, and calculated my worth in the only currency he understood. He was wrong by $67 million. Wrong in every assumption, every prejudice, every certainty about who I was and what I wanted. The document he created to protect his family from me revealed everything about him, and nothing about me. I signed nothing that day. But I learned everything I needed to know about the family I was joining, the values they held, and the man I was choosing who had rejected all of it. The prenup protected no one. The truth protected everyone. Especially me.